Ever since I knew what Star Wars was, the prequels have been panned for not being as good as the original trilogy. This has changed in recent years as nostalgia has also found its way to tint their glasses rose, but I can honestly say that controversially, I've always preferred the prequels due to the very ambitious nature that people despise them for. The world building, the wacky characters, the politics, and the melodrama. It's so full of spectacle, yet peppered with philosophy and intricate storytelling, which aims to mirror those original films while providing something entirely new. That being said, they are not perfect. Many of the complaints that people have had over the years are valid, so I've made a few tweaks to the film. Not because I think my version is necessarily better, but mainly to see how my vision of Star Wars would pan out.
The film opens with a Republic cruiser in space as it prepares to land on Alderaan. On board, C-3PO informs two robed figures that they're about to land. These two are Qui-Gon Jinn, the highly spiritual but not necessarily traditional master, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, his ambitious Padawan. They land and Viceroy Gunray contacts Sidious to discuss the trap set for the negotiators, and they muse about the manipulability of the Gungans. Sidious also assures his apprentice will be close by if anything goes wrong. The Jedi are brought to a meeting room by a delegation of Alderaanians and a Gungan official called Jar Jar Binks. There, discussions between the Alderaanians, Gungans and Trade Federation erupt into shouting as one side disputes the unfair debts placed upon them, while the Gungans side with the Trade Federation, being promised with greater representation over the planet. Throughout the dispute, red flashing devices are shown under the table and on both Republic and Nemoidian cruisers, before exploding as Qui-Gon senses at the last second to shield himself and his Padawan. Alarms blare. Representatives from both sides have been killed as the area is thrown into chaos, each side believing the other to have set the trap. The Jedi encounter some droids and beat them with ease, showing off the capabilities of the Jedi at their peak. Qui-Gon suspects Gunray's behind the attack, so they fight towards the command center, but the Viceroy sends droidicas to stop them. With no way to penetrate their shields, they are redirected to the streets as the Trade Federation ships descend upon the city, announcing that they are intending to secure the city for its own safety. Jar Jar gets saved by the Jedi and is enlightened to the false promises of the Trade Federation. They send him to Coruscant to testify for the Alderaanians. The young Queen Amidala is captured and her forces are made to stand down. The Jedi stealthily free her and some others as Captain Ramus Antilles leads them to the shuttles. Droids swarm the hangar and Qui-Gon spots a darkly robed figure. As they board to escape to Coruscant, Qui-Gon tries to push the cloaked figure but is resisted. The ships are fired upon by the blockade and Amidala's ship is struck as it jumps to hyperspace, damaging the comms and the hyperdrive despite the best efforts of R2-D2. Sirens blare as the ship drops out over a harsh desert planet in the Outer Rim, Tatooine. They land on Tatooine and Qui-Gon warns Amidala about the presence of the Hutts. She offers her handmaiden Padme to travel to the nearest town with the two Jedi to search for supplies to repair the hyperdrive. On the way, they meet two teenage scavengers, Anakin Skywalker and Owen Lars, who lead them to Mos Espa. Qui-Gon senses something about the boy and informs Obi-Wan, who remains skeptical. As they reach Mos Espa, a probe droid observes the Jedi as they meet Watto and Shmi Skywalker. Watto asks why the Jedi are so far from the Republic, but they avoid the topic and instead request to purchase some ship parts. But he is unwilling to sell them anything since their Republic credits have little value in the Outer Rim. Watto goes to watch his pod racer in the practice trials, and Anakin asks to join but is denied from coming. Anakin asks Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan about their experience exploring the galaxy as Jedi. Qui-Gon is happy to tell stories of their adventures, but Obi-Wan is still defensive and reluctant to reveal much. Afterwards, Anakin states that he wishes to explore the galaxy as well and save his mother from slavery. Anakin leaves and Qui-Gon speaks with Shmi about Anakin and the Force. She reveals that there was no father and Qui-Gon explains the living Force to her as he believes the Force brought them to Tatooine to train the boy. On Coruscant, Maul and Sidious discuss that the Jedi have been spotted on Tatooine. The Dark Lord permits that the Queen is to be taken alive, but to kill the rest. Back on Tatooine, Watto's pod racer was injured during training and no longer able to compete in the main event, so Qui-Gon offers the inexperienced Anakin to pilot the race on the condition that if Anakin loses, Watto gets their ship, and if he wins, they get their parts and he gets the winnings. Qui-Gon goads Watto to further wager either Anakin or Shmi, with a roll of the dice influenced by the Master Jedi to favour the boy's freedom. Obi-Wan quietly expresses to his master that Anakin is too old to be trained and holds too much attachment, but Qui-Gon reassures him to have faith. Padme sits with Anakin as he learns to pilot while Owen makes adjustments to the engines. Obi-Wan approaches to comfort the nervous pilot and tells him to trust in the Force to guide his movements during the race. In the final preparations, Owen gets distracted as Sebulba messes with the engine, which leads to the race occurring the same as the original, complete with a faulty start, Anakin catching up with skillful maneuvers, and the tether breaking from the sabotage. Despite this, Anakin wins and proves his natural piloting ability, being able to maneuver with precision and predict the actions of other racers. They celebrate as Watto carries off his winnings and Obi-Wan comes to collect Anakin and the ship parts. Through the crowd, Anakin is recognised by some thugs from whom he scavenged the pod racer for Watto, leading to a speeded chase across the desert. Anakin drives as Obi-Wan deflects blaster fire while they bicker about each other's capabilities, setting up the banter between them as they escape to the Alderaanian ship. The crew begins repairs, and Shmi tells Anakin that Qui-Gon wishes to train him as a Jedi. Qui-Gon assures Anakin that the Republic will return for Shmi with enough money for Watto, a promise that never comes to fruition as it dies with Qui-Gon. Darth Maul lands in the desert and sends out more probe droids. Qui-Gon and Anakin sense they are being watched as Obi-Wan joins their concern. That night, Obi-Wan explains to Anakin that becoming a Jedi is no light undertaking, and explains that typically younglings are brought to the temple at a much younger age to avoid attachments outside the Order, as it could conflict with their duties, warning Anakin that he must be willing to let go of his attachments on Tatooine. The next morning, Antilles informs everyone that the ship is ready, and Shmi leaves after secretly giving Anakin a necklace to remember her by. As they are preparing to board, Darth Maul leaps from the dunes and attacks the inexperienced Obi-Wan, while Anakin futilely tries to help. Qui-Gon jumps in and tells the others to board the ship. As they battle, the ship hovers overhead and Anakin lowers a rope to Qui-Gon, who evades the Sith warrior before grabbing on and climbing aboard. As they travel through space, Qui-Gon is concerned about the presence of the dark-side assassin and meditates. They land and meet Supreme Chancellor Valorum, Amidala's older cousin Bail Organa, and Senator Sheev Palpatine, who takes note of Anakin. Valorum admits to Amidala that his power is weaker than expected and doesn't wish to disrupt the democracy by exerting too much authority. In this version, the Jedi Temple is quaint and nature-oriented, as the Jedi practice with wooden lightsabers in the gardens like samurai. Qui-Gon seeks Master Windu, who is tending to the temple gardens, and they share tea while they discuss the encounter with the Sith warrior and his desire to train Anakin. Maul meets with Sidious again. The Sith Master chastises his apprentice while demonstrating his power, but ensures that there will be an opportunity to kill the Jedi soon. Queen Amidala reviews transmissions from Alderaan, where influential figures have been rounded up until the crisis settles, leaving the Gungans to renew the agreements as representatives of the planet in their absence. Qui-Gon introduces his old master Dooku and Jar Jar to help her case. Amidala expresses her dissatisfaction with the current system under Valorum, which prompts Dooku to convey his ideologies that eventually formed the Separatist movement. Anakin struggles to sleep as he clasps his mother's necklace. He coincidentally meets a similarly sleepless Padme, and they talk about the importance of the outcome for each other tomorrow. The next day, Qui-Gon meditates in preparation for Anakin's hearing before the council, and Bail Organa meets Amidala and Dooku to tell them that he and Senator Palpatine have spoken to other senators who fear the Trade Federation. The proceedings begin as it cuts between the Senate and the Jedi Council. The Jedi Council sit around Qui-Gon in a beautiful garden as Obi-Wan and Anakin wait outside. Palpatine approaches to allegedly speak with Master Yoda, who is off-world, but truly intending to confirm his suspicions about Anakin. He senses that Obi-Wan is wary of the potential older youngling, and is amused that the Jedi is showing signs of jealousy, and warns him that this is a path to the dark side. Amidala implores the other systems to take action against the Trade Federation so they aren't put into the same unjust situation, and suggests the formation of a peacekeeping unit which would aid the Republic. But the Neimoidians cut her off and argue that the Alderaanians were responsible for the attack, meaning their forces will remain in place until the debts are paid. Qui-Gon explains that he believes the Force brought him to Anakin, and that the re-emergence of the Sith indicates that strong Jedi will shortly be required. But the Council reject Qui-Gon's request, as the boy lacks control over his strength and emotions due to his attachments, and they do not believe the long-vanquished Sith have returned. Jar Jar testifies, and the other systems are shocked by the presence of a Gungan in the Senate. He mentions that the Chancellor sent Jedi to settle the conflict, but there is outcry as there was no approval from the Senate, and they question Valorum's supreme authority. Amidala and Dooku exchange a nervous glance as Palpatine watches from another platform, smirking. Each of the Jedi reject Anakin. They explain to Qui-Gon that they will not seek out the Sith warrior since they have been defeated for millennia, and the decision about Anakin will not be finalized until Yoda's return, but the outcome seems unlikely. Qui-Gon is displeased by the result, but leaves politely. Anakin's frustration in the decision is mirrored by Amidala's expression. The Neimoidians plant the idea that the Chancellor has conspired with the Jedi to usurp the authority of their democracy, so Valorum offers a delegation to investigate Alderaan, which Amidala believes will take too long. After some arguing, most agree to take a vote of no confidence against the Chancellor, as Palpatine smiles slyly at the proceedings. Later, Qui-Gon relays the decision of the Council to the others, expressing that they won't send anyone to quell the Sith presence, but he doesn't intend to wait around. He reveals that Padme is Queen Amidala and formulates a plan to liberate Alderaan and bring proof of the Trade Federation and Sith's involvement. A cloaked party consisting of Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Padme, Anakin, R2-D2 and Captain Antilles is led by Jar Jar through the lower levels of Coruscant down to the Gungan ship. Qui-Gon and Padme enter a bar and come across Hondo Ohnaka, who agrees to aid them because stopping the Trade Federation would improve his future profits. They plan to land by Otoh Gunga to convince Boss Nass to aid them, while the Jedi and bounty hunters infiltrate the capital, where Qui-Gon hopes that the Sith warrior will have no choice but to reveal himself. Anakin is initially advised not to come, but convinces Qui-Gon with the approval of Obi-Wan. As the group pass through the Alderaan blockade, one of the bounty hunters quotes, "I have a bad feeling about this," and after a tense minute, they successfully pass and descend to the planet's surface.
Jar Jar leads Padme and Captain Antilles through Ota Gunga, where she apologises to Boss Nass for the mistreatment of his people and begs the Gungans for military support in exchange for restoring their original lands and granting them greater representation. The other group infiltrate the palace and free a group of pilots. Qui-Gon instructs them to find a weakness in the blockade to allow safe passage for the other captives. Darth Maul reveals himself, dramatically igniting 2 blades from his lightsaber as droids flood in around them. The 2 Jedi instruct Anakin and the bounty hunters to protect the civilians and pilots, and then head for the Viceroy. In the confusion, C-3PO stumbles around as he tries to avoid blaster fire on each side. The Jedi begin dueling Darth Maul, while Anakin and the bounty hunters fight through waves of droids. Anakin shows some early signs of untapped Force ability, and the bounty hunters use ion weapons to take out the troublesome droidicas. Meanwhile, R2-D2 locates a weak point in the blockade and transmits it across. The squadron leader notes that there is only a short time before reinforcements arrive, so they need to attack now. Anakin's group order the cowering Gunray to stand down, but the other Neimoidians contact Sidious, and he coldly states that Gunray is no longer of use if he has let himself be captured. From outside, a formidable droid army approaches to siege the palace. So from here, there are 4 separate battles occurring simultaneously. The pilots, who have made enough space for the shuttles and turn their attack towards the blockade itself, the droid force imminently approaching the final line of defense at the palace, Maul easily holding his own against the 2 Jedi as they battle towards the reactor, and Anakin's group holding Gunray. One of the bounty hunters calls out the imminent droid force, so Hondo opts to escape, since the credits aren't worth much if he can't spend them. Anakin protests, but they burst through the window before he can stop them, and he's forced to take cover. While dueling, Obi-Wan spots Anakin getting overwhelmed and goes to aid him, leaving Qui-Gon to battle Maul alone. Anakin reaches for his blaster as it edges towards him slightly with the Force, but Obi-Wan pushes it to him as they finish off the droids together in synergy, complaining to each other to be more careful, having just saved one another. Maul gains ferocity in battle against Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan runs to return to the duel, but the Sith warrior impales Qui-Gon before he can reach them. Obi-Wan screams as his master falls to the floor, anger and regret boiling within him, and Maul turns his gaze upon the distraught Padawan who was too far behind. The Alderaan guards at the palace entrance are becoming overwhelmed and duck for cover as C-3PO arrives. When all seems lost, a blue ball flies through the air and impacts with electrical pulse before rolling and instantly deactivating several droids. More fly through the air as a horn sounds from the Gungan army, along with Padme, Jar Jar, and Captain Antilles leading the charge. The upset Obi-Wan fights Maul with savage strikes as powerful blows clash between them. Maul cackles at the Padawan's hatred, unintentionally knocking a button which activates a ray shield between them. The anguish in Obi-Wan's face fades as he sits and meditates, clearing his emotions and reflecting on his master's teachings. The shield becomes disabled and the duel resumes. Obi-Wan is far less reckless with his strikes, but still outclassed by Maul and disarmed, left hanging onto the reactor shaft. Qui-Gon, barely clinging to life, forces his lightsaber across as Obi-Wan jumps over Maul and slices him in half as his torso tumbles down the reactor. In the dogfight, the squadron leader sacrifices himself since torpedoes aren't yet developed on small ships to destroy the blockade to ensure the future safety of others. With the enormous explosion from overhead, a droid turns to another in confusion as they fall into disarray without clear command. The comms come online and the security force leave the barricade to finish them off. Obi-Wan runs to Qui-Gon's side and listens to his master's dying wish that he train Anakin in his stead, and the young Jedi promises to do so. Afterwards, Gungans and Alderaanians celebrate in a victorious parade. Though not entirely unified as a planet, its inhabitants cheer in each other's company for the first time, and R2-D2 and C-3PO have their first encounter. A Republic vessel lands as Palpatine and Bail Organa disembark to meet Padme. Palpatine announces that he is the new Chancellor and declares that the Republic will be quite different under his stewardship, and ensures a tragedy like this will never happen to Alderaan again. The newly elected Chancellor watches over the parade. The atmosphere is triumphant as everyone joins in celebration, unaware that Palpatine is the true victor in all of this. Obi-Wan is promoted to Jedi Knight for his actions in defeating a Sith. Yoda reluctantly allows Anakin to become a Jedi since he senses a great fall of Jedi at the hands of the dark side. And following Qui-Gon's request and Obi-Wan's proven ability and growth, he also assigns Anakin to Obi-Wan. At Qui-Gon's funeral, the fallen master's body is consumed by flames as Yoda and Mace Windu speak quietly. Yoda expresses concern that where one Sith is found, there always lurks another, one apprentice and one master. As he says this, Palpatine comes into view, staring into the flames at the edge of the group of onlookers.
In rewriting this film, I wanted to change a few things that were just common things that people didn't necessarily like about the Phantom Menace, and like stuff that I thought could be changed as well. This also sets up more things for what I have planned for the subsequent 2 movies. just to change some things around, which largely the Phantom Menace is fine to me. Like, a lot of it is not too bad, not as bad as everyone complains. But I thought that there were some changes that could have been made to appeal to better storytelling and other things like that. The first change I made was the setting being shifted from Naboo to Alderaan to create a stronger emotional connection with the audience, knowing that the planet will be eventually destroyed by the Death Star, adding a layer of dramatic irony. I've also changed Jar Jar Binks to be more competent, evolving into a leader in the Gungan-Alderaanian relationship, both in the Senate and across the battlefield in the final act. Initially, the Gungans are manipulated into aligning with the Trade Federation. However, Queen Amidala, aiming to rectify centuries of mistreatment, grows as a leader and begins to reunite her people, providing the Gungans with greater representation through Jar Jar. I just think that they handled the Gungans poorly in the original prequels, especially Jar Jar, and I don't necessarily believe that cutting him out of the movie is the right thing to do. I think that it creates more complexity to the story if he's there with these different races. However, I do see how it could create some unnecessary plot points and characters, but I still think he deserves to be there. And I felt it made more sense for the Trade Federation to seize Alderaan following a sudden attack, giving them a plausible reason to secure the planet despite the ones being who orchestrated it. In the original film, they just kind of seize it and then the Republic goes, not my problem. But I think that if it's to secure the planet for its own safety, that's a far more likely reason why the Republic wouldn't necessarily intervene. Another change I made was I wanted Anakin to be a bit older, so that he's a similar age to Padme, because that's weird. And in being slightly older, he can contribute to the conflict within the film a bit more. He's driving speeders, he's shooting people, he's actually involved in the final conflict, not necessarily just some random kid in the space battle. And then the change also coincides with being a scavenger for Watto as opposed to just some slave kid. And I wanted this characterization to be similar to Rey in episode 7, and him being older also allows him to have the speeder chase through the desert where he and Obi-Wan begin to bond. I also wanted Anakin to be a novice pilot who only wins due to his innate attachment to the Force. The Mary Sue sort of thing, I think, is specifically good for Anakin because it just shows he's a natural, he is the one. And so in this, Anakin learns that the Force can boost his abilities and provide him with greater confidence. But then this eventually overboils by the climax of episode 3 as he seeks more power and Force abilities, which eventually convert him to the dark side. Also with Anakin, I decided to introduce Owen Lars as his childhood friend, providing a better explanation as to why Obi-Wan left him with Luke for the original trilogy. I thought it was weird, he's just like some dude in episode 2 that has chucked him in there to explain why he's there in episode 4. But I think that having them be childhood friends and then Obi-Wan knows who Owen is already, because he doesn't actually meet Owen until the end of episode 3. I wanted Owen to also have the tinkerer traits typically seen by young Anakin because it suits his character more and it gives him something to do in the plot, being the one who's in charge of the pod racer, and it also sets up where he is in subsequent films, and it just suits his character more than Anakin is all of these things and he's also a tinkerer on top. Moving on to Coruscant, the Jedi Temple is more nature-oriented for the first film, but progressively gets more militaristic, and I wanted this to be a visual indicator of the Jedi and Coruscant as a whole, becoming more combat, technology-oriented throughout the war. I wanted it to be like a very obvious visual representation of the straying of the Jedi's path. This is an overarching thing that I'll continue with, but something else that I wanted to explore throughout the trilogy is the technological advancements that occur during the events of the Clone Wars. As such, smaller ships do not contain hyperdrives or missiles, and the Trade Federation army is comprised of mainly just B-1 battle droids and the newly developed droidicas before developing new units as the Clone Wars commences. Dooku is introduced as a disillusioned Jedi who shares his ideological concerns with Amidala. I want him to serve as a character similar to Padme throughout the series, but on a diverging path. This hints at his future role as the leader of the Separatist movement and provides more backstory to his character in being with Qui-Gon from the start, and then you can sort of see that relationship that eventually causes him to want to leave the Order. And throughout this series, I wanted Palpatine's rise to power to be more explicitly highlighted, showing his manipulative prowess and ruthless tactics from the beginning. When The Phantom Menace came out, people knew that Palpatine was Sidious. I don't think that was very difficult to understand, but I wanted the audience to know that it's less subtle. And then towards the end, I added in the bounty hunters to the final conflict because I thought it needed more to the story, and it sets up the relationship between Obi-Wan and Hondo Ohnaka. that I want to use in subsequent films, specifically Episode 2, when searching for Padme's assassin, he goes to Hondo because he's big in the crime underworld at this point. For the other two bounty hunters, I designed them after Daft Punk due to that Adidas ad, but they could be literally any bounty hunter. I initially had Bosk and IG-88. This is probably the part of the film I'm least convinced on, because it is a little bit random, but I think for story purposes later on it helps. And then just in terms of some design philosophy things, the Jedi robes follow a more distinct design than just being what Ben Kenobi wore in Episode 4 on Tatooine. Personally, I think that's a stupid design, considering he's hiding in the desert and he just looks exactly like a Jedi looks. Obviously, it does draw on a little bit of similarity, but I wanted it to be more of a cleaner, proper design look. Additionally, I wanted the Jedi Master's robes to be reminiscent of Darth Vader, retroactively indicating that Vader is a master of the Force. I also like the idea of Anakin's pod racing helmet subtly echoing Darth Vader's helmet. Not in the explicit sense where he purposely designed the Vader helmet to look like the pod racing one, but just for the audience to be reminded that this kid will eventually become a Sith warrior. Similar to that poster of Anakin and in the shadows like Darth Vader. I want people to be cheering for Anakin, but simultaneously and subconsciously knowing that this kid will be Darth Vader and he will be the worst thing in the galaxy.